America lacks that industrial scale and infrastructure, a skilled workforce, and all that to match China's shipbuilding output and capacity.
And if they have to be ended to the cost, all the stakeholders along the supply chains will suffer.
I'm optimistic that the Chinese shipbuilding industry will be able to navigate a potential crisis if a crisis is to be created.
The Chat Lounge. Chat Lounge.
Chat Lounge.
The Chat Lounge unpacks views and opinions on hot issues in a more casual way.
The U.S. is attempting to revive its shipyards, not with innovation, but with tariffs. A hefty $1.5 million fee on China-made bulk ships could shake global shipping. Will it backfire on the U.S.? Can America rebuild its shipbuilding industry? And will business pressure sink the plan before it sets sail? Welcome to the Chat Lounge. I'm Tuyun. Joining our discussion on America's China ship tax are Dr. Jane Haider, a reader in Transport, Logistics, and Operations Management at Cardiff Business School, Cardiff University. Dr. Zhou Mi, the Deputy Director of the Institute of American and Oceania Study, Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, and Dr. George Tzogopoulos, Senior Research Fellow of the European Institute, CIFE. Thank you all for joining the chat. Well, let's first take a look at the policy background. What prompted the Trump administration's China ship tax? Dr. Haider, it's your first time on the show. Shall we start with you, please?
Thank you for having me. Well, it's for very obvious reasons. President Trump wants to push back against the dominance of Chinese ship manufacturing. And the specific aim is obviously to counter China's dominance in global shipbuilding and strengthen American national security by what they wanted to revitalize the U.S. shipbuilding industry. I'll probably just keep it simple as that to start with.
And Dr. Tzogopoulos, from your perspective, do you have any different interpretation?
Well, I would say that it is quite significant to understand how President Trump views China and draw lessons from his previous administration. I would say that his China policies in general are placed in the very same context as much as possible to create obstacles to China's rise and in so doing to create obstacles to China's economic rise. So in this case, it is the shipbuilding industry of China which is in the interest of the American president. But I would also like to offer an additional thought which is relevant again to how President Trump is negotiating, because we see that President Trump emphasizes a lot on tariffs, but in the end, this is a tool for him to negotiate. So perhaps this is another tactic that the President Trump is employing in order as much as possible to speed up discussions with China and come up to an agreement as it had happened in the previous administration in 2020, just months before the pandemic.
The negotiation skill he is used to, right?
Yes, it's exactly this, and we are monitoring the same tactic as far as general tariffs are concerned, which are about to take effect next week. It is a methodology that the American president is quite frequently employing, and I assume that the debate about the fees on Chinese vessels docking in American ports is placed in the same framework. It does not mean that fees will not be applied, but I would say that the general debate is linked to his interest in negotiating with others, in this case with the Chinese government.
To what extent is it associated with his domestic politics stance? Some people just argue it's politically motivated.
Well, I would say that it is clearly politically motivated, as all this is part of his pre-election agenda and his pre-election rhetoric. What he's trying to say is that by imposing that type of tariffs, because even in this case we are talking about a different type of a tariff, of a tax that is about to be imposed, additional jobs will return to the American market and additional investments will take place in the American market. And in several of the messages also he's sending to the American public, President Trump is suggesting that because of his policy, he sees that different investments or announcements about different investments have already been made. So again, you are right in saying this. I would say that there is a combination of political and economic motivations from the side of President President Trump in order to connect his tariff policy with a revitalization of the American economy without, of course, suggesting that there's a direct linkage between the two. But this is what President Trump is attempting to achieve.
And to Dr. Zhou, do you have a different perspective as a Chinese?
Well, we know that this 301 investigation is started by or initiated by Biden administration. So it has some procedure requirement, about 6 months of investigation about the facts. And since Biden has initiated that, and Donald Trump is accepting these results and trying to do something to counter Chinese government. And I don't think that is, really a good one, because 301 is one of the very bad behaviors of unilateralism, and especially for the United States, because they have made some commitments in WTO to not use this kind of measurements against other members of WTO. Well, they should try to use dispute settlements if they find there are some kind of concerns, as the experts has expressed, that they are trying to raise concerns because of the so-called national security. They saw that the linkage between the military use of ships and the civil use of the ships are combined to have a very big impact on the abilities of the U.S. Security. But I don't think that is necessary to be the way if they want to just use a tariff as one of the negotiation tools to affect China or trying to regain its abilities in this development. Well, there may be another reason. That reason is because steel and iron is one of its focus when Donald Trump came into the White House as a first term. So he wants to revive or trying to make the United States steel and iron industries great again by using the materials. But it's not that easy if they still want to do that. I don't think that is necessary to just target in another countries. Maybe now China is the number one, but we know that South Korea and Japan also following the shares. I mean, there are still very big shares of providing ships in the world. So we know that for the shipbuilding industries, there are so many interactions, entwined relations among all the related stakeholders. So the actions may be not so effective, and it will have a much wide effects on the international trade, and we can find in the letter.
Right. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But Dr. Haider, you just mentioned Trump may want to push back or push down China's dominance in global shipping, but it's not like China's topped the chart only recently, right? If my memory serves me correctly, China has led the world in the 3 major shipbuilding indicators, namely shipbuilding completion volume and new orders and orders at hand for the past 15 consecutive years. So why now?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and Ying. Maybe a bit of a shipbuilding history for everyone. So as you correctly pointed out, the shift of shipbuilding from the west to the east didn't just happen yesterday. So Japan was probably the first to rely on shipbuilding back in the 60s and 50s to rebuild its heavy industrial capacity, and then became the largest shipbuilding country. And then South Korea kind of followed that path and became the largest shipbuilding country back in the 2003. And then China very much followed very similar pattern of shipbuilding developments in Japan and South Korea. And in terms of amount of contracts, it surpassed South Korea before 2010. So really now, very much the dominance of shipbuilding that China has didn't just happen yesterday. Well, if we were thinking about whether what US claims to, I mean, I really agree with the other two panelists, is perhaps used as a tool for negotiation rather than really trying to revitalize the US shipbuilding industry, because the answer to that is very unlikely for the short term, because it's just America lacks that industrial scale and infrastructure and skilled workforce and all of that to match China's shipbuilding output and capacity. And one more thing I want to emphasize is if you look at the shipyards in America, it very much focuses on military or naval vessels. It lacks that kind of commercial shipping competitiveness because it's just the bulk and container shipbuilding. These are all very much associated with the Oriental shipbuilding in China, South Korea, Japan, due to the higher costs, regulatory constraints, all that. These are not what US shipbuilding is associated with.
Right, and actually, the Ships for America Act, it's a bipartisan bill, actually mandates at least 10% of seagoing imports from China to the U.S. be transported on American-built, U.S.-flagged ships staffed by American crews, with the requirement taking effect in 2029. So, from what you just said, Dr. Haider, it seems it's not so realistic for the U.S. to reach that goal then.
No, not at all. I absolutely agree with you. It doesn't really happen overnight. You have to know that there are lots of time lags in shipbuilding, in shipping markets in general. The demand and supply in terms of shipbuilding or shipping market, what we call is there is an inertia in the demand and supply. Because for a ship, it needs 18 to 24 months to build. So once the ship is delivered back to the market, the whole supply and demand will be completely different. So really that process is a very long-term process. It's just impossible to change the current situation overnight. It's a long process.
Right. Dr. Tzogopoulos, what's your evaluation of the U.S. capacity or capability to do that or to replace actually imported ships?
Yeah, it's a very important question, and the other respectable speaker nicely highlighted the situation. It is right now too early and too premature to suggest up to what extent the United States is ready in order to make a replacement of what is happening for years, because China's dominance in the market didn't happen overnight, but it was the result of hard work which lasted for years. And American companies relied on the Chinese shipbuilding industry for years. And this cannot be replaced very easily, even if the United States have some time at its disposal in order to do so. And more importantly, beyond the potential of the United States to support its own shipbuilding industry, is to look at the repercussions of such a measure in the interim, because perhaps the effects of the implementation of such a measure will hurt the American economy to the extent that it will not be required in the end to look the extent to which the American shipbuilding industry could be ready. So it is a policy which is interesting to observe, obviously, but at the same time, I would say that there are so many factors that we need to take into account that it is quite hard right now to predict that the United States is really prepared to replace the Chinese shipbuilding industry.
The Chat Lounge. The Chat Lounge unpacks views and opinions on hot issues in a more casual way.
Right, it seems Dr. Haider and Dr. Tzogopoulos have reached a consensus here. But Dr. Zhou, can you provide some specific figures that can support the conclusion that the U.S. is incapable of doing what it wants right now?
Sorry, I don't have those numbers right now, but I think that I agree with the experts that the United States market is not able to just recover as before. So if we reviewed the history of United States shipbuilding, I think that maybe there was some flourish in time because of the World War II when the Pacific War was started. And the United States has put a lot of abilities on building the ships, the warships in San Francisco, in those areas, the shipyards. And it is because of the market driven for the United States to have the capabilities of building ships. But times change. We know that when the times change, we are seeing that transportation have different requirements. In the past, maybe the ships do not have to be that big, and they are taking care of just some ore, some not so many manufacturing products. But now we are seeing more containers and also the LNGs and also a lot of requirements based on the environment protection or other standards. So I went to several of Chinese largest shipbuilding factories, and I talked with managers there and technicians there. They told me that they have, every year and maybe every month, they have to work out on what are the trends of the global market, and they have to work out what kind of thing they can do to improve the efficiency for the fuels and also to improve the capabilities to meet the demand from the customers. So I think that the cooperation are not just for the ships building factories themselves. There are a lot of supply chain based calculation, cooperation, and also a lot of supply chain support. So if we are looking back to the United States, once we're looking at San Francisco and California as one of the main shipbuilding sectors. And now there are more advantaged technologies over there. The Silicon Valley has already becoming the driving forces for the development of economy. So the people there, especially in California, they may not like to work that hard in the shipbuilding factories. They are not able to handle those machines. They are not able to deal with that big, the giants of the ships. So I would say that is not based on just the single factories themselves. That is based on the supply chain, the industrial chains. And if you're looking at the data in my memory, China's, for the new orders for the ships, orders are building, and also for several other factors, China is almost taking half of this market in the recent years. So these are based on the scale of economy, and it is not that easy to take over just by putting some money and see that everything will be magic to change to United States to recover of that so-called the shipbuilding sector.
Right. Maybe it's like what you all mentioned. The United States is unable to revive or rebuild its shipbuilding industry in a very short period. But the White House obviously think it's a quite smart move, right? Up to $1.5 million levy on each commercial ship trying to enter U.S. ports. That could be a very good business, right? Of raising money or for the future years or to revive its shipbuilding industry. Is it? It can at least kill two birds with one stone, maybe in their eyes. Isn't that so, Dr. Haider?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Before I answer that question, I am able to give some figures just to compare the US shipbuilding scale and Chinese shipbuilding scale. So currently, China operates 5,500 or maybe over vessels worldwide, whereas the US has under 100 operated vessels worldwide. So that's the scale we have. And also take a company, for instance, Maersk is the biggest container carrier, so it currently has a current fleet that's 20% Chinese made, and the new build ships that they have currently ordered are 79% from China. So I think these figures pretty much sums up the different scales of Chinese shipbuilding and American shipbuilding. And then to answer your question, that's such a good question. Whether it's 1.5 million for Chinese-made containers per ship calling out U.S. ports, they can make a lot of money on one ship. Is that once, and then at the same time put constraints on Chinese shipbuilding? Is that one stone killing two birds? Well, the answer is no, because it has a massive impact on America itself. For once, the U.S. exports industries such as coal, oil, agriculture, the proposal to limit Chinese shipbuilding dominance would impose restrictions on U.S. exports very, very negatively, because these industries rely heavily on cost-effective Chinese-built bulk carriers. So now they're imposing tariffs on Chinese-made container ships. That's likely to increase shipping costs and reduce U.S. exports' global competitiveness. So that's one thing, maybe a smaller aspect. But even bigger aspect is the impact on the consumer spending. Because if that happens, that 1.5 million for each Chinese-made container ships that call on U.S. ports, ultimately that cost will be added to the end customers, meaning that the imported goods transported on Chinese-built ships become more expensive. Higher logistics costs can translate into pressure and reduce the consumer spending power. So I think, as Dr. Zhou correctly pointed out, it's that rippling effect, the supply chain kind of it causes, that the knock-on effect that what this might impose, and all that supply chain disturbance that it might impose, that's the bigger concern, not just that 1.5 billion gain per Chinese-made ship calling on US ports.
Then what can it get then? Can it get what it wants, actually?
No, I really don't think so currently. For the time being, it's very unlikely for America to gain what it wanted, because if the goal is to push back against China's dominance in shipbuilding, the impact or effect is very minimum, because US is not the number one client to Chinese shipbuilding. China can find alternative countries. China can invest other aspects like green ship technology and all that. So really that impact on China, it's very minimum, I'd say. policy, but it's more about the global supply disturbance and the US exports relying heavily on Chinese-built ships. That's more likely to be at risk.
Dr. Tzogopoulos, do you have any additional ones that you want to mention, potential impacts?
Yes, another remark. We are talking about an initiative which is currently in the form of a draft law or something like this. So we can't be aware of all the terms that will be agreed in the end in order to talk about the fees and who will pay the fees, because it's not clear to me to what extent several exceptions in the end will be applied or not. We know very well that President Trump, as I said before, is very often granting exceptions. So it's quite hard right now to anticipate or to calculate the impact of the fee about the vessels that will call on American ports. Again, it is a policy which is in the making. And that's why I'm also, as you said, quite skeptical concerning the calculation of the economic impact in terms of the fee. We know from the policy of the tariffs, for example, and the response of President Trump in his previous administration, that he provided subsidies to the American farmers. I don't know if he plans to do something like that with American companies in order to support their operation after the policy is to be implemented. So there are so many unknown questions right now. And at the same time, it's also interesting to see up to what extent ship owners are already drafting plans in order to deal with the implementation of such a measure as far as their ships are concerned. For example, are they prepared to use bigger ships and to keep some small ports in the United States? There are so many open questions right now, so it's quite difficult to calculate. And that's why I insist that there are so many factors that we don't know. So it's quite difficult to suggest that in the medium and long term, the American shipbuilding industry will necessarily be revitalized as it is the initial objective of this policy measure.
Actually, Edward Gonzalez, who's the CEO of Seaboard Marine, which is the largest U.S.-owned international ocean cargo carrier, has expressed a concern that national interests will not be served if the effort to boost American shipbuilding unintentionally destroys American-owned carriers. So, Dr. Zhou, did he exaggerate to any extent? Could the consequence be so bad, American-owned carriers being destroyed?
I don't think that is a kind of, it's still very difficult to predict about the future of its own carriers. But we know that for the international trade, especially for the logistics, there are so many competitors. So in the past, maybe there are some of the main carriers for, the agent or of trying to clear the customs. Some of them are the main ones. But now, if you are looking at China's, for example, there are so many thousands of, maybe not millions. There are so many companies who are able to do that. So the competition are very complete, and I think that is not that easy to have a very big price differences based on the same service and the same efficiency. So I would say that it is also very not unknown for me. So what is the nature of that fee? Because that we know that in the United States, the tariffs are decided by the Congress. The Congress has the power to decide, and also to collect those tariffs. But if they're going to look like just use the fee, I don't think it's a local one or a national one from the United States. And how can they allocate those money, and how can they distribute those money, or it just be collected by all the different ports? So we know that the Dodge by Elon Musk is trying to reduce the persons employed in the government. So there will be a lot of more conflicts if they are going to put more complicated procedures and different kinds of fees or tariffs on the imported or other different stakeholders. So I would say that there will be a lot of chaos if they are trying to put more interruptions from the governments to the market activities. And for the carriers, for some of these companies of the United States, they are not only operate in the United States only. If they have to operate in other countries, they may be afraid of just being taking advantage of charging extra fees also. So I would say that is a little bit uncertain for those carriers of even for the United States, I don't think that they will be very glad if they are protected in that way.
You've been listening to the Chat Lounge. After the break, check out whether business pressure is able to sink the plan before it sets sail. Stay with us.
The strong wind was howling and whistling.
He was the first Chinese citizen to graduate from Yale University in the mid-19th century.
I was born on the 17th of November. She had prominent features. 3 of us were old enough to lend a helping hand.
He navigated between 2 vastly different cultures and moved further to realize his dream and promote understanding between the people of China and the United States.
Ye Mingxing was a native of Hanyang. I realized no danger. China is really awakening.
Come and join us in discovering the incredible journey of Yong Wang in his autobiography, My Life in China and America. Check out the Audible stories on radio.cgtn.com and all major podcast platforms. Just search for the podcast Books and Beyond and find My Life in China and America.
Welcome back to the Chat Lounge. We now continue our chat on America's China ship tax. Dr. Zhou, what's your evaluation on the impact on China's shipbuilding industry then? Does the Commerce Ministry has any assessment over that?
I cannot represent the ministry, but I had some observation by myself.
Right.
So actually, I went around in China last year because they initiated the 301 investigation last year. I visited several the shipyards and the builders. I talked with them. They told me that maybe they still have some worries about that, but they already are very busy, because they already have so many orders. So I think that it's not a problem about whether there are too many China-built ships. The problem is that they are not enough because the trades are growing and recovering from the COVID and especially for the routes are opened. So they are going to buy more ships. For them, I think that they are still having some worries about the possible impacts from United States side. But in my understanding that, $1 million US, when you compare with the price, the value of the vessels is not that big. And if they have to be ended to the cost, I think that all the stakeholders along the supply chains will suffer altogether. It's just about the rebalance. So the people, when they're considering about the possibilities of doing business with U.S. market, they may consider it again and trying to find out whether it is possible to find some alternative. And that will make the price even going higher. So I'm not quite sure that Chinese, shipbuilding factories will be, destroyed. It's impossible, but they have to consider about some different ways. So we're not just, have some advantage in certain types of the vessels. There are so many new companies are trying to do more to meet the demand so diversified. Some for the cruise, some of the new fuels. I think that is possible that they will try to think about how can they make more diversification of the supply chains and trying to be better fit for the new environment.
Right. Dr. Haider, since you're specialized in transport logistics and operations management, do you have any estimation over possible maybe damage or losses that Chinese shipbuilding industry may suffer from this, short-term and long-term?
I think it's difficult to put it into any figure for the time being, but at the moment I can give you the latest figure about the Chinese-built container vessels market share. So in 2024, that's 81%. So that's the highest sector and higher than tanker or bulk carriers. So that dominance is very obvious. Well, to answer your question, I think initially very, very minimum impact that can affect the China shipbuilding industry because the ship order that have already been placed will continue being built. And the US is just not China's largest customer in shipbuilding. So I mean, over time, it may push China to diversify clients and push harder into global markets, as Dr. Zhou correctly pointed out earlier. But I think that's more of a long-term thing. But initially, in the beginning, the impact is minimal.
But it's hard to do so, right? To diversify its client. You just said it's already taken like over 80% of the global market.
Yes, I mean, in the beginning, it's minimal, but I think it will force probably Chinese shipbuilding in the long term if it does play an impact for that 1.5 billion fee charge and all that. One thing it might consider is to outsource to South Korea, Japan, to ally with these other major shipbuilding countries. They're top tier shipbuilders with strong US ties, and they can ensure that continuity of supply when rebuilding domestic capacity. I don't know about these. I think for now it's pointless to discuss about these because we'll just have to wait and see to watch this space.
Indeed, actually, the Chinese side isn't, sitting there and waiting for their death sentence, right? China's already continued.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, Ying. I feel at the moment, I think as the other two speakers correctly pointed out, it's more of that that impact on the logistics efficiency and the port operations globally and in America. That's more of the worry. I do wanted to probably elaborate about that port operations in America a bit, because for the time being, there are lots of, just kind of a bit of a background picture. Let's not talk about the biggest ports in America. There are lots of medium-sized ports, for example, Port of Oakland and some other ports, and they are operating not at 100% capacity, probably a much lower capacity. So with the tariff imposed on Chinese-built containers, very likely shipping companies will have to think about paring down port calls, divert containers to major ports, and that's likely to have a huge impact on smaller ports. So essentially, they're going to operate on an even smaller capacity, and will face that inefficiency if the ship routes schedule is altered, and there will be fewer ships at higher costs. So whether these ports will survive or not is very much of a question mark.
That's for U.S. Side, but on the Chinese side, government has begun implementing a new anti-sanctions law. So, Dr. Tzogopoulos, from your understanding of the Chinese government, what does this mean, and how do you expect Beijing to respond then?
Yeah, just a remark which is also complementing the thoughts of the other respectable speakers concerning the Chinese shipbuilding industry.
Sure.
In order to calculate all types of impact for the day after, it's also quite significant to look at the finance and the banking sector. So, I'm Greek, and Greek ship owners are dominating the market. One of the main reasons they are giving numerous orders to the Chinese shipbuilding industry is that they can get loans at favorable terms by Chinese banks. So perhaps this is an opportunity also for a recalibration of this policy. There are so many different aspects that the ship owners will have to take into account in the end. And that's why I'm optimistic that the Chinese shipbuilding industry will be able to navigate a potential crisis if a crisis is to be created. Again, because the finance and the banking sector are still favoring ship owners to give orders to the Chinese shipbuilding industry, because again, the loans can be provided at favorable terms, and perhaps in the future, more favorable terms will be negotiated between the two. Now, concerning the other question, I would say that this is the general Chinese policy is placed in the context of the determination of the Chinese government to respond to what is happening. What is quite interesting with the second administration of Donald Trump is that there is currently experience from his first administration, and this means that different sides involved in the trade war and different sides affected by the trade and economic policies of President Trump can already set up plans, and they had already the time in the past to set up plans in order to defend themselves and to protect their interests. So I would see that the Chinese new initiative is linked to that. And more importantly, because China was directly involved in the trade war in the previous Trump administration, I would say that this experience will perhaps render the Chinese government quite well prepared in order to navigate the crisis and protect its interests as far as the shipbuilding industry is concerned.
Dr. Zhou, how can we expect the Chinese authorities to counteract in this regard then?
Yeah, I think that it is very clear that 301 is always be against by the Chinese government. We were never just trying to say that 301 policy is a right thing, because we want to deal with the problem, the trade problems in the framework of WTO. So actually, I think that if you can look back in the last 8 years, China never say that we will agree that the 301 practices should be considered, even in the form of a negotiation. Well, if we are trying to look at the fact, I think that it is natural for us to try also to raise the concerns in the WTO framework on the dispute settlement, trying to see that the practices, if they will do, if they will do these practices, we will also file this kind of concerns in WTO. But on the other hand, I think that for the market economy, we will try to provide support for those enterprises who are suffered a lot from this kind of unfair practices. Well, if you're looking at the structure of the China shipbuildings, it's not just like the state-owned enterprises. There are so many private enterprises. They are even stronger and more capable in building the ships of different types. And in Jiangsu province and in Guangzhou and in Shanghai, there were several cities they are centered by dozens of enterprises who are doing the similar businesses. So the support will also trying to give them some of this information on the way and suggestions, how can we deal with the situation, because we know that there are so many new possibilities for the development, so many other countries who want to better integrated in the global market. So I hope we can provide a better support, not just from the monetary policy, but from the market side, and also encourage them to do better innovation. And especially for the businesses with Europe, I think that the expert from Greece also know that the trade between these two parts of Europe and also the East Asia is very huge. And we are seeing that there are a lot of geopolitical tensions in the Red Sea, in the Mediterranean. So many ships are trying to move further through the Cape of the Hope. So they demand different shapes, and I hope that will also provide some alternative for the market space. Well, we are seeing that some other countries in the Belt and Road regions, some of the developing countries in the Central Africa and the Western Africa, they are trying to export their products. It's not only about the raw materials, also about some of the manufacturing products. So the market are emerging. We cannot count everything on the U.S. market. And also, even for the allies of the United States, Canada and even Mexico are having some trouble with the United States. So for these two countries, they do need to find some alternative or try to diversify their trade. So the market is there. I don't think that we are, in the way of having less competitiveness, even based on that fee. We are trying to encourage those shipbuilding factories to be more focused on the innovation and trying to distribute or diversify their markets.
So you're saying that China or Chinese shipbuilders or shipping industry might suffer in the short term, but we still got alternatives, and it might be American consumers that turn out to be the biggest victim of the U.S. policy, new policy, right?
I think that, they have prepared. For Chinese shipbuilding companies, they have prepared that even 1 year before. But for the consumers, I think that they have to depend on the import a lot. They cannot, pay a lot of things.
Right.
They build a lot of things or manufacturing a lot of things in the domestic market. Even like the eggs, they have to find some alternative ways to import from other countries.
Sure. Then zooming out to a broader perspective, you've already touched upon how this may affect the U.S. and Chinese shipbuilders or other related industries. But from a global perspective, how would this policy, the U.S. policy, affect the global shipping industry and global trade dynamics in the short term and long run as well? And maybe Dr. Haider?
Well, in the long term, I think we've already covered quite a few points about it. But in the long term, it will put, I mean, as Dr. Zhou correctly pointed out about the Red Sea crisis, it has already put strains on global shipping. So with the tariffs imposed on Chinese-built containers, is really going to cause more tensions, and there is the risk of reciprocal tariffs or sanctions. It's just going to reduce the cooperation on global trade and climate issues with higher shipping costs, and ultimately, as you just correctly point out, the consumers might suffer ultimately. So all in all, I think the impact on global trade is very, very negative.
The Chat Lounge. The Chat Lounge unpacks views and opinions on hot issues in a more casual way.
Indeed, actually, it's a very lousy or negative outlook over there. But obviously, there are people trying to stop what the Trump administration tries to do. A coalition of around 300 American business groups, including farmers, dock workers, and ship owners, advocates against the proposed fees. They argue that, obviously, what we've already discussed, that this could disrupt supply chains, increase costs, lead to job losses at ports. But the question is, can they persuade the White House to adjust or withdraw this policy? Dr. Tzogopoulos?
Yeah, I think it's a very important question. And once again, it's quite significant to try and understand how President Trump is thinking, although this is a tall order. What President Trump seems to me is trying to do is to negotiate with others. And I would say that he takes into account complaints coming by both the domestic industry as well as by other countries. And in the end, what he's attempting to do is to formulate his policies in order to combine, to some extent, his pre-election rhetoric with the implementation of a policy that will serve the needs of him to deliver and at the same time will not hurt or damage the American economy. This is what he's trying to do with the trade war. That's why we are seeing so many exceptions in the last weeks, which were decided. And I expect that this is what could happen with the case of the American ship building industry. There is much flexibility in the American approach as well, and I would say that this is the word that perhaps can characterize what is to be expected concerning the shipbuilding industry and the tariffs on Chinese-built ships to call in American ports.
So you're saying, do you think the chances are high or low for them to successfully persuade the government to stop the policy?
I would say it's possible to persuade the American government to some extent. So I wouldn't suggest that the American government will completely change its mind, but I would say that the American government will take the complaints into account and be flexible in recalibrating its final approach. That's why I'm preserving a wait-and-see approach, because all this is happening right now, so it's quite difficult to anticipate how this could look like definitely in the medium term.
And what about Dr. Zhou, given your experiences in dealing with your American counterparts?
Actually, we know that USTR just held the hearings to listen to the argument, as you mentioned. Some of these groups are trying to say that it is maybe not proper for doing that. But I would think that if you're looking at this administration of the United States, a lot of people believe that Trump can bring them a lot of success. So as a so-called the MAGA, or they believe that the United States can be recovered or revived by tariffs, by the policies. So I don't think that they are really taking care of about the economic effects of some policies. They're just trying to follow the style or the signals of Donald Trump. But I think that is really sad even for the people who vote for Trump, in this election last year, and especially for some of the farmers. We know that the United States has exported so many agricultural products of the soybeans and the beef and also a lot of other things to other countries. If they are not able to find enough safe carriers, I think it will be impossible. It's not a problem about the money. It's not about the cost. Sometimes it's about the security, because that U.S. companies, when they are building the ships, I don't think that they can build enough good ships to fulfill their transportations or export. So sometimes I think that maybe just from the hearings, it is still very difficult for them to just hear from where the people really want. But maybe in the future, I don't think that it's good. But if there are some problems, some accidents happened through this transportation, they will have some alerts. So I think it's still a very difficult time, because the reaction line is very long from the people to the decision maker. There are so many, so many stakeholders or so many factors that will have impacts on the decisions. So I'm not so optimistic about the result, and we should be prepared for that result.
When you say we, you mean China, right?
And not China, but also the people who are on these supply chains, the ship owners and the carriers, some of the companies, the logistic companies and shipbuilding factories, and some of them like the engines or equipment suppliers. All of these stakeholders to trying to think about how can we do to rebalance the different the margin of the economic performance.
Right. Then if the U.S. policy is in place, then Dr. Haider, how long do you expect the U.S. may revive its shipyards?
Well, that's a really good question. And my answer to that is very long. It's going to be, if it ever happens, we're talking about decades in terms of the time frame with that. It very much because the other two speakers both talked about the multiple stakeholders and the complexity of this whole problem. Because shipbuilding very much depends on investment, policy support, market conditions, and all the suppliers and all that. So it's not going to happen overnight. A ship takes 18 months to 24 months to be built, as we've talked about earlier. So it's the revitalization will not happen overnight, because it just includes rebuilding infrastructure, training workforce, and developing competitive technologies and all that. None of these will happen overnight. And one thing I do want to emphasize is that shipbuilding very much depends on steel industry. So around, I would say, 60%, if not more, of the costs of the construction of a container ship is steel. So a strong shipbuilding sector requires a very strong domestic supply chain for shipbuilding, including steel. And the question is, does America have that infrastructure? Can it support the shipbuilding industry with all the domestic supply chain for shipbuilding? The answer to that is probably no, or very, very questionable.
But maybe the American iron and steel industry is quite confident, because the investigation was brought up by the steel union, right?
Yeah, but I don't think they have reached a conclusion about that. There are, I think, with President Biden, there were some maneuvers about that. But at the moment, what I can see is still very much of a question mark whether they've got that infrastructure and the a strong kind of domestic supply chain for shipbuilding.
Right. And last but not least, it seems the world is about to face a chaotic storm on the sea. So I'd like each of you to, maybe provide your advice to those directly affected, like U.S. exporters, importers, or agriculture, fossil fuel industry operators, or shipping companies and operators, or consumers. Pick whatever you want to, maybe come up with some advice for them. Maybe shall we begin with Dr. Tzogopoulos this time, please?
Yes, I would say two main things. The first is to be prepared for the worst, because I think this is the best advice in a changing world where protectionism is becoming the key lemma that is applied in today's changing world. And the second thing is to be prepared also for negotiations with the other part, because experience suggests that it is possible through negotiations to come up to agreements that can serve the interests of both. So a twofold strategy, starting for the worst, but also being hopeful that a negotiation tactic could also lead to a mutually beneficial agreement.
Fair enough. And Dr. Zhou, please.
Okay, I think that when we're trying to look at the future, there are so many uncertainties. So for the consumers of the United States, I think that it is very difficult for them to try to save some more money and trying to earn more money to prepare for the inflation. Well, for some of the companies, I think that it is possible for them to try to consider about the new pattern of the global existence. Maybe they can try to change the position of its domestic factories in other countries, like in Latin America, where there's no fee for the port logistics, and it is also likely that we should be prepared for the financial impacts along the supply chain of the ships, because we know that for the ships building, they do need a lot of money, and this money are in the position of trying to be better used. Well, for some of the Chinese companies, I would suggest them to trying to be prepared for this impact and trying to consider about the possibilities of doing some of the improvement. Well, I don't think that it's a bad thing to invest in the United States. Well, if Chinese companies, they do have the possibilities and they have the willingness, it is also not bad to invest in the United States for having a better profit. But we have to consider about all the factors. Do we have enough human capital and the supply chains? And there really are very important problems we have to take care of. So in the future, when we are trying to look at the technology side, there are artificial intelligence, new models of businesses. I encourage the companies to be prepared for the uncertainties and trying to improve their abilities to be flexible to adapt to the changing world.
Quite sensible. And Dr. Haider, please.
Thank you. I definitely agree with the other two speakers. I think that strategic alternatives and the stakeholder engagement, these two aspects are key to speak for maybe shipping companies and the supply chain partners that are likely to be affected. For them, it's really to seek new markets, perhaps to shift focus to building kind of that demand, and then find new partners, with the Belt and Road Initiative, partners, and perhaps to invest in green shipbuilding, these green decarbonization initiatives to stay competitive.
Thank you. Well said. And that brings us to the end of this chat session. Many thanks to Dr. Jane Haider, Reader in Transport, Logistics and Operations Management, Cardiff Business School, Cardiff University. Dr. Zhou Mi, Deputy Director, Institute of American and Oceania Study, Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, and Dr. George Tzogopoulos, Senior Research Fellow of CIFE, for your time and insights. The show is available on all major podcast platforms. Please email us your comments at radio@cgtn.com. I'm Tia, thank you for listening. Join us again for more Chat at the Chat Lounge next week.
I cannot marry you while your mother regards me.
Step into the world of timeless elegance with Mrs. Spring Fragrance, a captivating audiobook by Edith Eaton, read by Man Ling.
Because The green leaf still clings to the bough.
Experience the lively yet complex lives in Chinese American communities at the turn of the 20th century as Edith Eaton's delicate prose weaves together themes of tradition, change, love, and identity.
Forget all that belongs to the joy of life.
Follow the journey of Mrs. Spring Fragrance and witness the struggles and fights of those living on a rapidly changing exotic land while holding on to their cultural traditions, or more importantly, to their identities.
He could hardly believe that his daughter was seriously opposed to becoming the wife of such a good-looking, prosperous young merchant as Wang Ling.
Join Books and Beyond for Mrs. Spring Fragrance. Let the stories come to life in your imagination. Subscribe to Books and Beyond for free on your favorite podcast platforms, or log on to radio.cgtn.com for more.